The Mandurah establishment attacks Adams and North. Martin North, John Adams, and Robbie Barwick in the interest of the people. Hi, guys.
Hi, Martin.
Hi, Martin.
So we had a bit of fallout from our previous post.
Yes. So we had in the last 24 hours, the Mandurah Coastal Times put out their weekly edition. We are featured on the front page. The sky's falling in. We'll put the graphic on the screen. Obviously, our show, The Economic Massacre of Mandurah, was front and center in the reporting in Mandurah. There was more articles about us on pages 4 and 5. And on page 5, there was an article in which the mayor, the state MP, who's an ALP politician, and the federal MP, who's a Liberal, Andrew Hastie, they all attacked our show. They said we exaggerated some of the things that we said. The state MP, said that maybe some of our statistics were not accurate. They basically said that there are problems. They didn't say there were no problems. They said there were challenges, but it was nowhere near to the severity of what we said, and it wasn't a sort of case study in which particularly people on the East Coast should be focusing on. So perhaps they were aggrieved that a couple of Easterners came out west and poked their nose in places where they think that we shouldn't. But I think this is important because we just aired the interview with Charles Smith, who's a member of the state parliament, who basically is on our side of the argument. So he basically did confirm a lot of the things we said in relation to Perth, but we'll go through some additional detail about Mandurah because just to give the audience a sense. I mean, there is one particular federal politician who watches the show on a regular basis, and going back to before the election, this federal MP approached me on a couple of occasions and said, I think it's time you stop talking about the problem and start focusing on solutions. And I kept on saying to this MP, and we still have this regular dialogue, I said, I can't talk, and this is in the government, this is the backbencher, and I said, I can't start talking about solutions until the Prime Minister and the Treasurer acknowledges there's a problem. And once you're starting to get politicians in Mandurah saying that we're just hyping things up because we want to be sensational to get YouTube views, I mean, this is the fundamental problem facing the country. The biggest debt bubble, mass denial, the politicians have completely the wrong policies in place. And yet, when you try to highlight some of these problems, you get attacked for it. And one, I don't think that's fair. And two, it's kind of like Alcohol's Anonymous. I mean, the first part of recovery is to acknowledge there's a problem. And our problem is that the politicians, except for Charles Smith at this stage, who went public, are unwilling to be forthright and openly discussing what's going on.
Yeah, so I talk about the case for action. You need to demonstrate a case for action, right? Because until you've actually demonstrated there's a problem,
yep,
and people acknowledge there's a problem, you can't take the conversation beyond that.
Yep.
And unfortunately, it seems to me that all of the weight of politics, both at a federal and a state level, are still in the, no, there's no problem here, we'll just inflate the housing bubble a bit more and everything will be absolutely fine. And the other point to make is that a lot of the comments from people who saw the original show in the area, actually, it resonated with them, and they said, actually, yeah, we've been seeing this for a long time and it's getting worse. And there was almost nobody who said, no, it's completely fine. So third point, just quickly, is, of course, they also, in their responses, they sort of grabbed the Armageddon thing and said, well, you've said there's Armageddon there now. And we never said that, right?
No.
What we're saying is that the signs are there and there are important indicators of stress and difficulty which will continue to get worse unless somebody changes direction.
Yes. So I want to just come to that point right now. So we had Andrew Hastie. This is his quote from the piece. Quote, exaggerated videos claiming Armageddon has occurred in Mandurah is over the top. Now, so on this point, now just go back to the previous video. I didn't say that Armageddon has hit Mandurah. I said people in WA think that Armageddon has started, and I said in the previous episode that the global debt bubble and the domestic debt bubble continues to expand, and the crisis that I've been talking about for 4 years hasn't even started. So things will get much worse in Mandurah, and so that's what I said. So you've got a federal MP who knows nothing about economics, who basically misquoted me, and now is basically saying we're doing exaggerated reporting rather than actually fronting up to his own constituents and actually acknowledge that there's something really wrong in that part of the country.
So, hey, Robbie, what was your reaction? Were you surprised, or was this as expected?
Oh, well, I like it when you get some pushback, because it means that you've made an impression. You've hit a raw nerve, and you can see it's a raw nerve here. Further to your comment, there's a massive gulf between what the politicians are saying and what the public in Mandurah and around Perth have communicated back to us. Right, we've come along speaking to the truth that they are experiencing, and no one else has done that. And I'll give you one predicate that was conveyed to me by Barry Mason, who's our CEC man on the ground over there, who was the driver who drove John and I around Mandurah. He was on the street in Perth last week. This woman stops us at the table, because we have tables out in public, spreading our message. This woman stops at the table and said, "Oh, I just watched this show, Interests of the People, John Adams, Martin North, talking about Mandurah," and she was amazed by it, but in a way where she was acknowledging how on the money it was. And she felt thrilled to meet Barry when he told her that he was the driver, because she's a random person, and that show made a big impression on the locals. We've got the local business people acknowledging it on the media, etc. And that's the difference. And not just that, it's in the paper itself. Look at the headlines beside the front, this dramatic front page. Fast food break-in, stores hit, right? The things that we were saying about the state of Mandurah are what the people are feeling, right? But we had a unique perspective on it, and there are just two parts to comment on. One is, I think what John has said is right. We were clear that this wasn't Armageddon. Now, they don't want to hear that, because that means it's going to get worse. We know it's going to get worse, right? Anything could tip it over the edge, including an international shock. And the whole of Australia goes with it. We're just saying it's the worst in Australia. It's going to get, or the leading edge of the decline in Australia. But also, more importantly, why did we see what we saw? Because we came at it from the standpoint of people from the East Coast, looking at it through the eyes of the property market of Sydney and Melbourne, and saying, my God, if Sydney and Melbourne get like that, then this could be curtains for the Australian financial system. And that's what gave us a unique perspective, where the locals were saying to us, we've become used to this, and that was an important perspective, and it's a message that should be acted on, but the politicians don't want to listen to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely right, Robbie. And it's interesting also, I got feedback from other regional areas, particularly up in Queensland, where people were saying, if you think it's bad over there, you should come up and see, these other suburban areas, particularly up in the mining areas in northern Queensland, where somewhat similar things are happening. And so I think further confirmation that we're not just picking on this particular postcode in Western Australia. We're saying there is a fundamental set of issues playing out around high debt and around high levels of stress and around flat incomes and rising costs. And we're just seeing it building and building and building in multiple locations. And unless the politicians do begin to actually react and change direction, then we are going to see more of the same ahead.
And one point, a couple of points I'll make is, so I actually got an email from a local in Mandurah who actually made the suggestion that what we did in the last show was we showed all the for sale signs. Well, what this person was suggesting was that if you actually go on the online listings on the internet, you're going to find more property that's on for sale or that's available for rent or lease in Mandurah that doesn't have a sales sign or a rent sign in front of the property. So even though we showed visuals, people are saying no, it's actually much worse than what we showed on camera because some of these properties don't have signs. So that was one thing. The other point is that so there was a quite an important interview that was done on 6PR last Friday. So there is a small business owner that owned a sports store in Mandurah. He has decided to close his store because of the social problem with the crime. His store got robbed recently. He lost $100,000, and he said he's had enough. He said a number of things in this interview, and the interview is publicly. We'll put a link to the interview, and it goes for about 12 minutes. I would recommend people see it. But he actually did quote our show. And he said we didn't exaggerate; it was pretty much on the money. There was a few quotes that he said in this interview that I thought were worth just picking up. So the store owner is Hayden Burbridge, 12th of July. A couple of key grabs from the interview was, quote, "We are the epicenter of this problem in relation to ice and meth." So again, big drug problem, and some people I think didn't like our suggestion about Mandurah being the epicenter. Well, this guy on the ground, who is seeing the drugs, seeing the drug dealers, seeing the drug users, saying, no, Mandurah is the drug epicenter. In terms of our show, he said, quote, "We see exactly as they say." So as we said, he says, I see it on the ground. So here is a non-politician, a business person who has been personally impacted by these problems, and he said our reporting was accurate. And then in terms of crime, this is the quote, "The town is literally out of control." Well, to be honest, that quote that this small business owner said in this interview is perhaps even more stronger than what we said in our show about Mandurah. And so people on the ground saying the town's out of control. And also he said that the social problems are directly linked to the economy, and retail fell off a cliff in 2017. So again, everything we said, it's been confirmed by this small business owner on 6PR last week. I would recommend people listen to that. And again, when you're getting politicians basically going against, independent observers, but then people who live in the town and who we're very consistent. I mean, there is a massive political problem in this country with elected politicians. For whatever motivation, they are not telling the public what's going on.
Yeah. And is it true to say, Robbie, that Andrew Hastie has sort of in the past made some acknowledgement of the fact that debt is a problem and the household sector is an issue?
Yes, so that's what makes his comments there surprising, because I've met Andrew Hastie 18 months ago and in Parliament House, and he made clear the reason he was meeting with me and Dr. Wilson Sy at the time. We were there talking about things like Glass-Steagall and bail-in, but we'd put their request in the context of economic threats on the horizon for Australia and cited the housing bubble. He made it clear the reason he was meeting is because of his personal concern about the property market. He's been watching it closely for years. He's read a bunch of books, he said, and he named people like Harry Dent, The Big Short. He has a very personal concern about this, and why shouldn't he? He's the member for the area that covers Mandurah. Of course he should, but he doesn't say that in the newspaper. He's distancing himself from what we say. And I think, to me, the bottom line is Andrew Hastie is putting his loyalty to his party ahead of his responsibility to his constituents. Because look what his party is doing at the same time. The Assistant Treasurer, Michael, how can Andrew Hastie say anything different when the Assistant Treasurer, Michael Sukkar, has come out in the last 24 hours urging young families to rush into the housing market? It's about to go up. Go and get yourself in more debt, right? The policy line from the Liberal government that Hastie's a part of is in total denial about this, right? And for Hastie to acknowledge publicly in the Mandurah Coastal Times what I know he expressed to us that he feels would be contradicting his own party's line.
Sure, and Robbie. So on that point, look, yeah. So today in the Australian, the Assistant Treasurer and the Housing Minister Michael Sukkar basically told people to take a chance on property. So I just want to go to this quote. The title of the article is "Buyers Told to Chance the Market by Minister Sukkar." Quote, Housing Minister Michael Sukkar has urged first home buyers to try to snap up a property now ahead of the government's signature loan deposit scheme starting next year, warning that house prices are likely to increase. The most important financial decision any Australian will make, the average Australian will make, is to buy a property because it is the biggest amount of debt that they'll take on in their lifetime. And we've got the biggest bubble in the history of the country, and you've got the housing minister saying, rather than actually taking prudent action, going to a financial advisor, making sure you can service this debt in good times and bad, he goes, take the dice, roll it, and take a chance. I mean, this is the most reckless statements from a politician, given the economic context, I've ever heard. And yet all we're hearing is this bubble mantra narrative from the ministry. Now, there are clearly people on the backbench, because I spoke to these people last night. There are people on the backbench who fundamentally disagree with the Prime Minister, fundamentally disagree with Sukkar and with Frydenberg. They watch this show. We have regular conversations. I'll be down speaking to some of these people next week, in federal Parliament. And yet, for a range of reasons, they're unwilling to say anything publicly. Although Tim Wilson, the member for Goldstein, went on the public record in Hansard last year in the House of Representatives and was the only member of the coalition to say that we're headed towards a crisis. So he was the only one. But again, when you're getting people like Hastie attack us rather than actually, because before the election, a whole bunch of Liberals and Conservatives around the country saying, well, he could be a future PM. And I'm saying to these guys, one, he doesn't really understand economics, and two, can he show leadership on the national level? And we just heard Robbie say that this guy's been studying Harry Dent, and we've interviewed Harry Martin, and Harry's saying we're headed towards a depression. And so the guy that's been studying one of the key writers that's saying we're having a depression, saying exaggerations about Mandurah and the risk to Mandurah are overblown. Well, I mean, there's a complete inconsistency that I see. And it's not worthy of someone who potentially aspires to become Prime Minister.
Well, and just to add to that, if you look more broadly, you've got the Housing Industry Association saying housing affordability is now really improved, right? So it's really a good time. And you've got CBA, the economists at CBA, who published a report yesterday basically saying now is a wonderful time to get back into the housing market, and they're seeing a lot of interest from prospective purchasers, and it's a good time to buy, right? So everybody is trying to build up all around this same thematic, which is let's put some more debt logs on the fire to stoke this thing a bit further, because essentially they are completely out of policy.
And I dare say it's coordinated. It's certainly coming across that way. I interviewed Philip Seuss, and that interview is up on YouTube now. People can watch it. Philip likened this to World War I trench warfare, where the soldiers are sent over the top to race into the machine gun nest, but this time it's households, and the bullets are the debt that they're being encouraged to take on. Is Sukkar, when these young people get trapped, because what Sukkar's spreading is fear of missing out, right? That's how they drove the bubble. People had this fear of missing out, and they're trying to revive that. And this is the most explicit that they've been. But the authorities have more subtly been doing this for more than a decade anyway, right? Assuring people it's not a bubble, etc., and everyone was encouraged in and looking the other way with this mortgage fraud. But now they're in their desperation. They've never been this explicit, and he's implying that look, the market's about to take off. Though he contradicts himself in his statement, because he said that the first home buyers deposit scheme, which is coming in January, he said it won't distort the market. Yet his whole statement is talking about the market's about to take off. He's encouraged people to get in there before that. So these are very clear messages for young families. I don't want to miss out. Let's get in there. But what happens if it doesn't work, right? The Key Start program in Western Australia, that they've been talking on the East Coast here about modelling this new scheme on, that worked only as long as the market was going up. In the last few years, when the market hasn't been going up, all it's done is trap people in negative equity, and they can't even roll over their loans. And their loans are these loans have got a higher interest than what they could get from a commercial bank, right? If and when that happens, if this hype doesn't work, is Michael Zucker and Josh Frydenberg and Scott Morrison going to pay their debt for them? Is the government going to come in and cover that? Or is Scott Morrison going to announce again, oh, it's caveat emptor, buyer beware. You're responsible for your own decisions, even though these are unsophisticated people being encouraged into the market, right? Shoveled into the market effectively, like being forced to storm the machine gun nests of the enemy in trench warfare. That's why, the CEC, we have a slightly different approach to John. John's knows a lot more what goes on inside the political system, is trying to get through to these guys. You've got to acknowledge there's a problem. We've been saying there's a problem for a long time. We've said, look, we talk about nothing but solutions. You've got to be addressing these things from the standpoint of solutions. And one of the things that, as we've discussed, Martin, is, all these people trapped in this debt. There has to be an approach to say, look, we've got to have things like a moratorium on foreclosures while this debt is sorted out. The government's got to get in there, audit the banks, find out where all the risks are. A lot of debt has to be written down. You're going to have to reform this system in a big way, and that's our approach. John has a slightly different approach. You might have a slightly different approach, but the point is, when we're talking about this, we're not trying to say to the government, look, here's the problem with Mandurah. Somehow you've got to get the prices back up again. That's not the solution. That's their solution. That's all they're thinking. No, we've got to solve this debt problem in a fundamental way. You can either have a depression and have chaos and let everyone sort of fend for themselves and do it that way, or you can do it in a more orderly way like we hope to do, but it's got to be solved. Prices have to come down. The debt has to come down.
And just to follow on from Robbie, I mean, again, I've said this multiple times, but I had a meeting last December in federal parliament with a federal MP. They said to me that the strategy is plausible deniability from the establishment. They know there's a problem. They don't want to be blamed. They don't want to lose their careers and their jobs. And they're just trying to kick the can down the road, hope something overseas blows up like Deutsche Bank. So here's the thing. If Deutsche Bank blew up tonight, Scott Morrison's going to say, well, I don't control that bank. I don't control Germany. Not my problem. The economy was great. Low inflation, low unemployment. Fundamentals were strong. It was something we couldn't control, we couldn't foresee. Well, that's what they're hoping for, because they're trying to escape the crisis, the domestic crisis that these policies have created. And all we're seeing from this government is policies that are going to exacerbate the risk, exacerbate the debt, trap more Australians into this vortex. And they're going to create more victims. And the on the issue of political justice, my biggest fear is no one's going to be held accountable, from officials to politicians. They're all going to walk away in the night and they're going to say it wasn't us. And who's left with it? It's the innocent Australian who got trapped in the propaganda, made a whole bunch of poor financial decisions, and they're the ones that have to suffer the economic and social costs, just like people in Mandurah, just like these small business owners saying people are heavily on drugs and all of this sort of stuff, and yet the people, the architects of the system, basically get away scot-free. That's not a fair society, and that's not the country I want to live in.
No, absolutely. So to summarise, so everybody understands, we stand by what we said with regard to Mandurah, right? And the implications need to be absorbed, and people need to understand that this is a very important leading indicator of trouble ahead. There is still time to do stuff, and Robbie, your suggestion is, I think, a good one in terms of dealing with the debt. But if the political class continue to deny anything is wrong, there's no chance of actually beginning to address the fundamental issues that need to be addressed.
Absolutely.
Robbie, John, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Martin.
Martin North, John Adams, Robbie Barwick, in the interest of the people. We'll see you next time.